Good evening, Rowan. It's the 29th of October 2016 and it's about 12:30, just after midnight. And obviously this is my usual video before the weekend to reassure you I'm not going to be seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. Anyway, I thought we could have a little chat this evening about your wife, because it seems not only are you broadcasting yourself over the airwaves and behaving in a very manipulative and abusive way, like threatening to kill me if I don't rediscover a sacred cosmology and that kind of thing. I've talked about it on videos before, so I won't go over all that now. But it appears that your wife is doing the same thing, because she was on a programme on Radio 4 which was broadcast on October the 9th, and judging by the things she's saying in it, I'm guessing that it was recorded about a month before that, because I don't think you'd been quoting from Sash songs at the time when this programme was recorded. So anyway, before I come on to that, I'm going to talk a bit about your wife, because she's supposed to be a feminist, but she's a kind of feminist like Hillary Clinton. You know, the kind that doesn't really want equality for women, but just wants everything she wants herself. And no one's allowed to criticise her. Or they're sexist. And if people don't give her what she wants, they're sexist. And then she goes around destroying other women who've been assaulted by her husband, Bill Clinton, and getting off child rapists as a lawyer and that kind of thing. So your wife seems to be a kind of Hillary Clinton kind of feminist. Like, she has to have what she wants. But then she just despises and tries to ruin women who've got a complaint against you, like me, for example. So she's behaving in this terribly manipulative way in this programme on Radio 4. It could be you talking. Maybe you wrote the script for her, you never know. Anyway, I have put some information about this a bit later in this video, so I won't talk about it anymore now. But I want to tell a story of one occasion when I encountered your wife. This would have been around February or March 1994. And I'd met her a couple of times before that because she'd given a talk about feminist theology at a theology study group that I went to. And anyway, she came to give a lecture at the university in Cardiff. Now, I was doing a course, it was my final year, and the title of the course was 20th Century Feminist Responses to the New Testament. Anyway, she came in to give a lecture about women priests, which was a bit of a surprise already because the lecturer had said at the beginning, this course hasn't got anything to do with women priests. So I don't really know why she was giving this lecture anyway. Probably you'd stuck your nose in, I think, and said she had to come and give this lecture, or you wanted her to come and give this lecture. Anyway, there was only a small number of people doing this course, about 20, and we were sitting in a room that was in an old house that had been bought by the university, and all the students were sitting round in a circle, and the lecturer was just at the front of this room on the same level as the students, and I was sitting up at the front, at the left-hand side of the lecturer. Well, first of all, your wife turned up phenomenally late to give this lecture. Now, I smoked at the time, and she was so late that some of us went out to have a smoke. So it takes about 10 minutes to smoke a cigarette. And so, well, I was certainly out there for 10 minutes, and I knew her because I'd met her before, and I didn't see her while I was out there for 10 minutes. And then I came back in to the classroom, and I was sitting there waiting, and about a minute later, she came breezing in, didn't apologise for being late. She'd kept us all waiting a really long time. And then she said to the lecturer, "Oh, I've been walking up and down the street outside. I couldn't find the place, and I've been walking up and down for ages." Well, she hadn't walked up and down at all. I knew this because I'd been standing out there for at least 10 minutes. So I thought it was a bit obnoxious to come in and not apologise for being late and keeping the students waiting and the lecturer waiting as well. So then she started to give this lecture. Now, I was very interested in the subject of women priests, and I knew a lot about it. I'd read everything I could get my hands on. They didn't have the internet really in those days, so I'd read books and articles and papers and all this kind of thing, and I was very familiar with all the arguments of people who were in favour of women priests, who were against women priests. So I didn't really think she was going to say anything that would surprise me. However, I was wrong. So bearing in mind now we've got a class of undergraduates, about the age of 21, most of them, although I was 25 at the time, because I went as a mature student to university. Anyway, so she started talking about women priests. Now, I can't remember everything that she said, but she did spend a considerable amount of time talking about semen, which I thought was quite strange, really, because I'd never heard anyone mention this in relation to the subject of women priests before, whether they were in favour of women priests or against women priests. So she was talking about some ancient writings, I can't remember who'd written these things, where they were talking about the fluids in people's bodies, and apparently semen was regarded as being a hot fluid, and menstrual blood a cold fluid, and this somehow made women inferior to men because they had this cold fluid and men had this hot fluid. I'm still not clear what this has to do with women priests. Anyway, after she'd spent all this time talking about semen, she then leaned towards me because I was only sitting a few feet away from her, and she stretched out her arms in front of her and clasped her hands together, and she smiled at me and she said, "So now you know all about women priests." And this was after she'd just been talking about semen. Well, I just thought this was totally bizarre at the time because you hadn't tried to get your leg over at the time. That happened a few months later. But I think what she was saying was that I couldn't be a priest. This was, by the way, a couple of months after the Provincial Selection Board of the Church in Wales had turned me down, and you said you were supporting me and then went around slandering me behind my back everywhere for decades. So she leaned towards me and said, "So now you know all about women priests," after she'd been talking about basically women can't be priests because they haven't got any semen. That seemed to be the thrust of her argument, although she was in favour of women priests because anyway she's a feminist. So I just thought this was completely bizarre at the time, and it really freaked me out. Well, it came to a break in the lecture. She'd got to the end of it, and then we were going to watch a video of some women bishops in America. They had women bishops in the United States, so we were going to watch a video about that after this. So after she said this, and it was a break in the lecture, that really freaked me out, so I didn't say anything, and I went outside and had another smoke. I think I'd have probably taken up smoking at that point, even if I didn't smoke. So that's what she said, and I didn't understand at the time the connotation of it, but I think she was saying that I couldn't be appraised because I didn't have any semen. And I now think that you were going to supply me with the semen. So that was a pretty creepy experience. So that was about the second or third time that I met your wife. So that was the experience of it. And now she's saying quite bizarre things on Radio 4, which was broadcast on October the 9th, but I actually only came across it this week by accident. So before I move on to talking about that, I just want to say about how you first met your wife when you were in Cambridge and you were a lecturer in Cambridge. Or something to that effect. And you were actually engaged to someone else, a Lutheran ordinand, and then your wife turned up. The Lutheran ordinand was from Germany and she was on an exchange or something. I've put a little slideshow with some information about this later on. And then your wife, Jane Paul, as she was then before she married and changed her name, turned up in a discussion group that you were attending. And this is how you met and hit it off, apparently. But anyway, the point is that your wife's father was a bishop in the Church of England, so I'm sure that's a complete coincidence that you broke off your engagement to be going out with Jane so you could marry her, and her father was a bishop in the Church of England. I'm sure you weren't thinking that that might help your career prospects at all. I'm sure there was nothing like that on your mind. I mean, it's not like you're a psychopath or anything, and you don't even form ordinary relationships with people the way that other people do. So that's my introduction to this, and I'm going to play this slideshow and a video where Jane is talking about women's rights. She gave a long lecture about women in Christianity, really, she's talking about, and she gave a long lecture about this a couple of years ago, and this video's on YouTube. So I'm just going to play those clips there, and then I'll come on to talk about the programme.
My third assumption is that it's Christianity that has given women the dignity and the status that leads us now into questioning how we are to exercise that. In the ancient world, women had no dignity and no status. On the whole, legal documents and so on did not expect to treat women as real people. Women were simply very much like slaves, possessions and belongings of men. Most ancient civilizations revolve around the needs of men. And when you read some of those ancient texts next to the Bible, what strikes you is the shocking difference in the way that women are treated in the Bible. Women are treated as real people. They're recognized right from the beginning as people called by God into discipleship. And that call is going to be heard equally by men and by women. It's not going to be mediated to the women through the men. They are going to hear God's call directly. Just comes off every page of the New Testament, that assumption, which we can take for granted because we don't read and hear what everybody else in the time of the New Testament would have been reading and hearing. The huge difference in assumptions about women.
So I'm talking about the first excerpt from this programme now, which was called Something Understood and was broadcast on the 9th of October 2016. And you also did an episode of this programme, which was broadcast on Easter Sunday 2016, and I've already made a video about that. You were absolutely hilarious in it. All your fantasies spilling out about how this is all going to end. You live in a complete fantasy world, and so does your wife by the look of it. Anyway, so this is the first excerpt. This is your wife speaking now, Jane Williams, and she's talking about Blaise Pascal, and she says that he says, "The heart has its reasons of which reason knows nothing. We know the truth not only through our reason, but also through our heart. Pascal was not opposed to reason, but he believed that what we can articulate and prove is only part of what we know. The reasons we give for our attitudes and our behaviour may only be the tip of the iceberg of the reasons our hearts know but cannot speak." And then she goes on to say, "I've always been fascinated by the relationship between learning and language, between what the heart knows and what we can articulate." And she then goes on to talk about Sigmund Freud. Now, her family seems to have quite an affection for the Freuds, since one of her sisters was knocked up by Sigmund Freud's grandson. So she goes on to say, Sigmund Freud describes a game that he watched a small boy playing. The boy was about 18 months old and could talk only a little, but he designed for himself an elaborate and satisfying game which brought him endless pleasure. And then in the radio programme, there's a clip here of somebody else speaking as Sigmund Freud, describing this event. And then your wife, Jane, goes on to say, "My great-niece is at the delicious age where she's beginning to interact with others, beginning to want to be part of a social occasion. She seems convinced that she's joining in a conversation. The sounds come out with a recognisable sentence structure and with pauses for others to contribute, even though at a few months there are not yet any words. But she's clearly delighted at her contributions and listens carefully to responses before offering her own reactions again." So I get the distinct impression that she's not talking about her great niece here. She's talking about me, and this is related to some of the themes that Jane, your wife, talks about in this radio programme, which had occurred in videos that I'd made about you in relation to the Desert Fathers and to C.S. Lewis and Narnia, and also to the fact that you can't understand metaphor. So these themes all come up in this radio programme. So I think that your wife here is trying to tell me that I'm acting out something that's a pre-verbal state, and that you're not really communicating with me, telling me you're going to kill me, or somebody's going to kill me if I don't have sex with you or with your perverted pretend astrophysical clergy friend, and that I'm just imagining I'm joining in this conversation, and all of this is going on at a pre-verbal level. So this is the kind of experience I came up against time and time again in the Church of England, which I now know that you were engineering. It didn't matter how much evidence I presented to substantiate my case, whatever it was at the time. It was always put back on me that there's something bad's happened in your life and you haven't come to terms with it. They were always going on about me having an unhappy childhood and this kind of thing. None of them knew anything about my childhood. And actually I was a very happy child. So and I had lots of friends, and it was a really nice time of my life. But they were just making all this crap up, and I think this is what she's saying here, that I'm somehow fixated in a pre-verbal state, and I'm only imagining that you're communicating with me and trying to manipulate me with techniques of mind control and gaslighting and all this kind of thing. And this is gaslighting as well, saying that I'm imagining this. She knows perfectly well that I'm not imagining it, because you're in cahoots, aren't you? All psychopaths have enablers. You've got an awful lot of enablers. I mean, you had the whole Church of England at one point, didn't you? So you've had a lot of enablers, and one of your enablers is your wife, and she's just about as nutty as you are. She could have never tolerated being married to you all this time if she wasn't as mad as you are. So she's talking about this niece, allegedly, although she's having a snipe at me. But she's clearly delighted at her contributions and listens carefully to responses before offering her own reactions again. She's learning something about social interaction, about how to respond and get responses. But while I can only articulate what's going on by describing it in words, something just as important is going on in her head, presumably, without the words to describe it. Well, I'm describing perfectly well what's going on in my head and what's going on in reality as well. And listen, Rowan, and listen, Janie, this isn't in my head. You're a pair of scumbags. So you say, she says, soon the words and phrases will become familiar and comprehensible. She'll get responses that directly fit what she thinks she's saying, and so her learning will be reinforced and will increase exponentially. And then she goes on to say, Monteverdi's famous musical Echo is of course designed primarily to make clever use of acoustics, but when we hear an echo we can't help hearing a human response, even when, in the course of an ordinary echo, it's nothing of the kind. Well, you were mentioning echoes in one of your videos about the Desert Fathers, so this is one example of why I think she's having a snipe at me, this talk of echoes here, because you described the creation narrative as being like God calling into a cave and all the echoes coming back in harmony. And I explained in this video that there wasn't actually a cave in the creation story, so this was probably a psychological process of yours. And since you think you're God, you're the one calling into the cave, and this is how you think other people should react to you. They should just echo back what you say in perfect harmony, and you think that that's the role of other people. It's certainly how you behave. Anyway, that's the end of the first clip. I will show the clip and then make another comment in a minute.
The 17th century French mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal earned his reputation as a precocious and brilliant scientist. He designed an early calculating machine and worked on the theory of probability. But he also famously said,
"The heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing. We know the truth, not only through our reason, but also through our heart."
Pascal was not opposed to reason, but he believed that what we can articulate and prove is only a part of what we know. The reasons we give for our attitudes and our behaviour may only be the tip of the iceberg of the reasons our hearts know but cannot speak. I've always been fascinated by the relationship between learning and language, between what the heart knows and what we can articulate. So it's ironic that I'm about to explore it mostly by using words. Sigmund Freud describes a game that he watched a small boy playing. The boy was about 18 months old and could talk only a little, but he designed for himself an elaborate and satisfying game, which brought him endless pleasure.
The
child had a wooden reel with a piece of string tied around it. It never occurred to him to pull it along the floor behind him, for instance, and play at its being a carriage. What he did was to hold the reel by the string and very skillfully throw it over the edge of his curtained cot, so that it disappeared into it, at the same time uttering his expressive "ooh, ooh, ooh." He then pulled the reel out of the cot again by the string and hailed its reappearance with a joyful "da," meaning there. And this then was the complete game: disappearance and return. As a rule, one only witnessed its first act, which was repeated untiringly as a game in itself, though there is no doubt that the greater pleasure was attached to the second act. The interpretation of the game then became obvious. It was related to the child's great cultural achievement, the instinctual renunciation. That is, the renunciation of instinctual satisfaction, which he had made in allowing his mother to go away without protesting. He compensated himself for this, as it were, by himself staging the disappearance and return of the objects within his reach. Her departure had to be enacted as a necessary preliminary to her joyful return, and that it was in the latter that lay the true purpose of the game. Of course, Sigmund Freud is wrapping words and reason around the child's game, despite the fact that the child cannot confirm or deny the explanation Freud gives. The game he's playing is powerful magic for controlling the world, but it doesn't need words to work. My great niece is at the delicious age where she's beginning to interact with others, beginning to want to be part of a social occasion. She seems convinced that she's joining in a conversation. The sounds come out with a recognizable sentence structure and with pauses for others to contribute, even though at only a few months there are not yet any words. But she's clearly delighted at her contributions and listens carefully to responses before offering her own reactions again. She's learning something about social interaction, about how to respond and get responses. But while I can only articulate what's going on by describing it in words, something just as important is going on in her head, presumably, without the words to describe it. Soon, the words and phrases will become familiar and comprehensible. She'll get responses that directly fit what she thinks she's saying, and so her learning will be reinforced and will increase exponentially. Monteverdi's famous musical echo is of course designed primarily to make clever use of acoustics. But when we hear an echo, we can't help hearing a human response. Even when, in the case of an ordinary echo, it's nothing of the kind.
Yes. Let's talk about you though, Jane, because this is all about ministry, theology and you. Your early life in India, why was that?
Yes, I grew up in South India in Kerala, one of the most beautiful places in the world. My parents were CMS missionaries there. My father was the principal of a theological college, so born and bred theologian, I'm afraid. And I felt very privileged to have been born into a church that isn't just the Church of England. That's part of my horizon from childhood, is that the church is worldwide.
Well, was it strange growing up in a place that you didn't feel you quite fitted into, perhaps?
Yes, in some ways it was strange, and one was always aware of being a visitor in somebody else's country, and I think that's quite a good training too, for a Christian.
But you kept in touch with home. I know you had a wonderful aunt, and people sent you presents and kept you up to date with what was going on in this country with Cliff Richard and Cindy dolls and things like that.
That's very clever of you, yes. We had my mother's parents were very determined that even if their daughter was taking her children off to some strange country, the children were not going to be deprived of British culture. So yes, Cliff Richard, and she used to send dolls and records, and it was records in those days. Do you remember records?
Yeah. Very well. Very, very well. What was it like though at school there? How did you feel when you were being educated in a different country from your own?
Well, I mean, I went to boarding school from the age of 5, which makes me feel quite weepy when I think about it. Although at the time you just took it for granted because everybody else who was at school with you was also the same kind of age. And it was a boarding school that was mixed. It wasn't just English children, it was children from all the possible cultures in India. And apart from the deprivation of being away from home, that was a wonderful education.
So the clip you've just seen there is Jane talking about her early life, and she was effectively abandoned by her parents at the age of 5 years old, and still talks about that as if it were traumatic at this late stage in her life. So she's never had any counselling about it or anything like that. And you also had this very dysfunctional family. You were very ill anyway as a small child. Your mother was very overprotective of you. You spent a lot of time off school, ill, and reading a lot. And I've made a video about this before. This is why I think you can't tell the difference between fantasy and fiction, because when you should have been engaging with other people and other children and learning about life from other people, you were in fact reading fiction. And this is why you can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality, in my opinion. So you had this dysfunctional life. You usurped your father and your mother's affections because your father was a very remote figure, and this is why you've developed this extreme narcissism and a very abusive personality that you have. You behave in a very abusive way towards other people, and you think you're entitled to things from other people. And then your wife Jane was abandoned by her parents at the age of 5. She's still traumatized by it, and the pair of you go around insinuating that there's something wrong with me, something pre-verbal that I can't articulate. I've got some complicated thing going on inside of me. I had some unhappy childhood or something like that, even though that isn't true. I was very happy as a child, as I've already said earlier on. So why are you two screwed up people in a position to be interpreting other people then? You haven't faced your own traumas and your own difficulties. You've both got this very superior attitude. You look down on other people, you're looking down on me, and you think you can go around telling the whole world and ruining my life because you're saying that there's something dysfunctional about me, and you're just inventing it. It's all in your head, and you've had this very disturbed childhood, both of you. If I believed in projection, that would be it, but I just think you're doing it on purpose. And the whole purpose of your enterprise, both of you it seems, is proving that you are perfect. And there must be something wrong with anybody who shows you up in a bad light or who criticises you. So just forget about my childhood, because yours both was completely disturbed and dysfunctional. So I don't want to hear another word about my childhood. You interfere in busybodies anyway, it's got nothing to do with you. And I still don't know how that made me into a repressed lesbian and a priest seduce. You're just a bunch of fantasists, honestly. And all your fantasies lead in the direction of bolstering your ego and feeding your narcissistic delusions. Anyway, I'm coming back to this programme now. So your lady wife goes on to say, Wittgenstein famously said that if a lion could speak, we wouldn't understand it. So she's referring to lions here, and I did just make a series about you talking about the Chronicles of Narnia and Aslan, and that you identified with Aslan. And you, oh yes, you said in these videos, didn't you, that people couldn't believe there was a whole world behind the wardrobe. And I said, well, that's because there isn't. It's fiction. So anyway, so she's talking about a lion here. Wittgenstein famously said that if a lion could speak, we wouldn't understand it. Yet speech is one of the primary metaphors for God's communication, although you might have thought that God, who's not a created being in the universe, would be even harder to understand than a lion. I don't know if that's supposed to make some sense or not. So she goes on to say, in Genesis, God speaks creation into being, and the Christian retelling of this story in John 1 tells us that the word God speaks is able and willing to become flesh, and she emphasises flesh here. Well, the word of God may be able and willing to become flesh. But that doesn't mean you're getting your hands on my flesh, Rowan, and neither is your perverted pretend astrophysical clergy friend either. So you can pass that on. I talked about this as well in relation to you. I said that God speaking has creative power. He can speak creation into being. This is what he did at the beginning of Genesis. And then I also said that you seem to think that your speech has creative power as well, because you think you can just say that something is a certain way, like I'm a certain way and I've got a certain character and I'm going to act in a certain way. You can just say it and then it's automatically becomes true that I'm just going to do what you want. And this is why you're so bewildered when things don't go the way you want them to, because you think you're the novelist at the centre of it all and you speak things into being and you don't understand other people as separate entities. I've made a few videos about that. So then there's the Bible reading of the first part of John's Gospel, chapter 1. Read by someone else, and then Jane goes on to say, so now there's the extraordinary mixed metaphor of a divine language that becomes a human being, and even more strangely, a human being who has to learn to speak. The mixed metaphor of a divine language that becomes a human being, and even more strangely, a human being who has to learn to speak. Your wife talks as much crap as you do. Honestly, what is that even supposed to mean? It sounds very impressive, but it's noise pollution. It doesn't serve any useful purpose, that statement, does it? A mixed metaphor. That's not what a mixed metaphor means, is it? So, yes, to say that Christ is the Word of God, well, that's a metaphor, I suppose. So now there's the extraordinary mixed metaphor of a divine language. So God speaking, to speak of God speaking, that's metaphorical. And to refer to Christ as the Word, that's metaphorical as well. I'm not sure why that's a mixed metaphor. That's not what mixed metaphor means. So there you are, she's as mad as you are. That becomes a human being, and even more strangely, a human being who has to learn to speak. Well, you're just tying yourself up in knots here. This is just tying yourself up in knots for no effective purpose. The Word of God made wordless, a wordless baby, able only to cry and babble. I think she's having a snipe at me there, that's saying that I cry and babble. That's because, it's all me just expressing my pre-verbal things here, isn't it? Well, whatever. It's not like I'm just doing a lot of research and describing exactly how you are and what you've been up to. Oh, no. It's because there's something wrong with me that I'm saying all of these things. Because you're God, obviously, so you must be perfect. So anyone who criticises you must have something wrong with them. And also, anyone who's going to disrupt the life of your fellow narcissist by having you put in jail must have something wrong with them. There couldn't possibly be anything wrong with you or her, could they? Even though you had these really disturbed and dysfunctional upbringings. Oh no, there has to be something wrong with me. The word of God made a wordless baby able only to cry and babble like my great niece. Learning how to join in the world of human communication. Well, that's the end of my second section there, and I'm going to talk about a third one in a minute.
Wittgenstein famously said that if a lion could speak, we wouldn't understand it. Yet speech is one of the primary metaphors for God's communication. Although you might have thought that God, who's not a created being in the universe, would be even harder to understand than a lion. In Genesis, God speaks creation into being, and the Christian retelling of this story in John 1 tells us that the word God speaks is able and willing to become flesh.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth.
So now there's the extraordinary mixed metaphor of a divine language that becomes a human being, and even more strangely, a human being who has to learn to speak. The Word of God made wordless, a baby able only to cry and babble, like my great niece, learning how to join in the world of human communication.
So this is the final excerpt I'm going to talk about here. So this is what Jane says. If the heart has its reasons about which reason knows nothing, that doesn't make the language of reason useless, but it suggests there is also a knowing that's not primarily language-based. As a theologian, it's my job, and indeed my joy and delight, to try and give words to our understanding of God. Well, there's already been quite a lot of words spoken about our understanding of God in Christian tradition. So it doesn't really need all that much obfuscation. Although your wife doesn't seem to obfuscate as much as you do, and she doesn't tend to make up words either, although she does use them in unusual context, like she used the word delicious earlier in quite an unusual context where it didn't really fit. So she then says, the words of theology are tried and tested and truthful, and she emphasises that, says it very slowly. So she can't be talking about you then, can she, if she's talking about tried and tested and truthful. So then she says, but they are bound to be incomplete at best, and that's not an admission of failure, but a celebration of the fact that language has limits. I'm not too sure why we should be celebrating that. That's quite a strange thing to say as well. So she then says, somewhere deep in the recesses of our wordless memory is the time of our infancy, where we learn faster than we ever do again, and yet can never tell ourselves what we've learned. I don't know why we'd want to really. I mean, a lot of things that we learn in infancy are instinctual things that we just take for granted, really. You know, how to use our body to walk and talk and things like that, and develop spatial awareness. So there's quite a lot of learning goes on that's unconscious. It wouldn't. Oh no, other creatures learn the same things as well, apart from talking. So I don't know why it would be helpful to us if we knew about all these things consciously. So she then says, yet that wordless learning shapes us and the stories we'll go on to tell and live for the rest of our lives. The stories we tell about God and the lives we live in response to God must be put into words that are as clear and profound as we can make them. So she's relating here the wordless learning that there is in infancy to how we understand God later on. So I think she's got some unresolved issues there. This is the thing, you see, with people like you. You see, you're narcissists and you've got all these unresolved issues, and instead of resolving them in yourselves, you go around trying to resolve them in other people. And where they don't exist and where other people who are confident and mature make you feel inadequate, you have to go around slandering them and trying to destroy them and that kind of thing. And it's all because of your trauma that you've never come to terms with, that you have to go around trying to ruin other people to make yourselves feel better. So then she says, but then there are the stories that the heart tells in its own language, echoing and connecting with the words we speak, but never entirely contained in those words. What a thrilling thought. So, thrilling. That's quite an unusual thing to say. I wonder what she could possibly mean by that. She wouldn't be alluding to sex, would she? What a strange woman. And then she says, I'll leave the last word to T.S. Eliot. And then there's someone else reading a poem of T.S. Eliot. I shan't read out the whole thing, but I'll play it in the clip. And the first line of it is, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So you're both dreaming, because I shall not be returning to the Church of England and I'm never having anything to do with you, Rowan. So zip your trousers up and fuck off. And your wife can fuck off as well. Some feminist she is, providing all this support and giving the air of respectability and credibility to you for decades, and slandering and trying to manipulate and abuse women who are your victims. Well, what a feminist, a Hillary Clinton feminist. So anyway, I shall leave it there for now because it's quite late now, and obviously I'll be wanting to go to sleep, to dream about my beloved all night long, because I haven't mentioned him yet, have I? Well, obviously I'm saving myself for him, and we're going to be together forever as soon as you're in prison, because he's just so wonderful and sexy and a brilliant theologian, and he's very mature and kind, and he tells the truth all the time. He's nothing like you at all. He's really attractive, you see, and you're not. So I'll leave it there, but don't forget, as soon as you're back from South Africa, I'll be turning up to arrest you, make a citizen's arrest for terrorism, because you're a terrorist according to UK law. So be alert. Hasta la próxima.
If the heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing, that doesn't make the language of reason useless, but it suggests that there is also a knowing that's not primarily language-based. As a theologian, It's my job, and indeed my joy and delight, to try to give words to our understanding of God. The words of theology are tried and tested and truthful, but they are bound to be incomplete at best. And that's not an admission of failure, but a celebration of the fact that language has limits. Somewhere, deep in the recesses of our wordless memories, is the time of our infancy, when we learn faster than we ever do again, and yet can never tell ourselves what we've learned. Yet that wordless learning shapes us and the stories we'll go on to tell and live for the rest of our lives. The stories we tell about God and the lives we live in response to God must be put into words that are as clear and as profound as we can make them. But then there are the stories that the heart tells in its own language, echoing and connecting with the words we speak, but never entirely contained in those words. What a thrilling thought. I'll leave the last word to T.S. Eliot.
We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, unremembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall and the children in the apple tree. Not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well, when the tongues of flames are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one.
Don't try to change me, you're wasting your time. Now I got something much better in mind. Robert De Niro's waiting, talking Italian. You bring me alive. He's a bad, bad boy. I'm a bad, bad girl. And we're getting back to
This is why Catholics have the best sex.
Adelante.